In 1980, the band Kiss was in the throes of a profound crisis. The album Unmasked had just been released to disastrous failure. Performances shrinking from massive arenas to cramped theaters, and the once unstoppable rock machine bleeding money without mercy. Yet, in a basement studio in Connecticut, Ace Frehley was quietly creating something that could have altered the entire landscape. 12 tracks. Rough, powerful, and brimming with brilliant vitality, an album no one ever heard. The recordings vanished for nearly 4 decades until a summer day in 2019, when a dusty cardboard box in a New York garage unveiled what may be rock history's greatest regret. What lay on those tapes? Why were they concealed? And could they truly have rescued Kiss from its darkest chapter? Before we delve into this enigma, if you're passionate about untold rock histories and backstage secrets that reshaped music forever, hit that subscribe button right now. You won't want to miss what's ahead. To truly grasp the gravity of what Ace Frehley crafted in 1980, we must understand just how desperate the situation had become. Kiss had dominated the 70s spectacularly. They sold millions of records, filled colossal stadiums, and built an empire on theatrical rock and merchandising brilliance. But as the 80s dawned, that magic was evaporating at breakneck speed. The Dynasty album in 1979 marked a turning point, but not the positive kind. Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley were steering the band toward disco-influenced sounds, aiming for mainstream acceptance. It yielded commercial success with I Was Made for Lovin' You, but it left the core fan base feeling utterly betrayed. Fans who had idolized the raw, dangerous power of Kiss Alive or Destroyer wanted no part of synthesizers and dance rhythms. They craved guitars that roared, drums that thundered, and the primal energy that had forged Kiss into legends. Then came Unmasked in May of 1980. The album rarely mentioned today because it embodied everything wrong with Kiss at that moment. It was soft, overly commercial, and reeked of desperation. Tracks like Shandy or Tomorrow felt like blatant grabs for radio airplay, desperate bids to snag the pop crowd. The sharp edge that defined Kiss, the danger that made them thrilling, had been polished away to nothing. Sales mirrored the disappointment starkly. While Dynasty hit platinum, Unmasked struggled to gain traction. The U.S. tour scaled back from grand arenas to modest venues. In some cities, tickets didn't even sell out. For a band once untouchable, this was pure humiliation. Ace Frehley watched it all unfold with pained eyes. He had been increasingly sidelined during the Dynasty and Unmasked sessions. His guitar parts simplified, sometimes swapped for session players. His songwriting input rejected outright. Gene and Paul were tightening their grip on the band's direction, and that direction left no room for Ace's bluesy, raw guitar style. It excluded the swagger and edge he brought. The rift between Ace and his bandmates was widening into an abyss. He drank more heavily, arrived late to sessions, sometimes skipped them entirely. The dynamic turned toxic, spiraling toward an unavoidable end. But in that shadow, something was unfolding in secret. Unknown to anyone in the Kiss camp, Ace was composing. Not just composing, he was recording. In a modest studio space he rigged up in Connecticut, far from the political squabbles, heated arguments, and Gene's domineering presence. Ace Frehley produced music utterly unlike the diluted Kiss of 1980. It echoed classic Kiss, like Destroyer, like the band everyone longed for. Ace told no one about his work. Not Gene. Not Paul. Not management. He had learned from his 1978 solo album that independence granted creative liberty, Kiss no longer allowed. That solo effort was a revelation, outselling the other 3 Kiss solo albums combined, proving Ace Frehley possessed something unique. Something audiences truly craved. New York Groove became a bona fide hit, climbing charts and scoring radio play nationwide. It established him beyond mere guitarist in Kiss. He was a genuine artist with his own voice. Now, 2 years on, he reignited that fire. The setup was humble. Nothing like Kiss's high-end facilities. But Ace needed no extravagance. He had his Gibson Les Pauls, Marshall amps, and the innate talent that made him one of rock's most distinctive guitarists. He enlisted a handful of trusted players from the New York scene who grasped his vision. Anton Fig, the drummer from his solo album, joined several sessions. Some bass lines came from a familiar studio bassist. It all happened quietly, meticulously. No hype, no fanfare, just unadulterated creation. The tracks emerging from these sessions were astounding. They carried the heavy riffs and melodic flair of Kiss's finest, but with added layers, maturity, depth. Ace wrote from lived truths now, the pressures of fame, the alienation in a band he helped build. The clash between artistic purity and commercial pull. These weren't mere party anthems. They were raw, honest outpourings from a silenced musician. One track stood out sharply, a 6-minute epic opening with a languid blues intro before erupting into a scorching guitar display. Tentatively titled Fallen Angel, it chronicled watching beauty self-destruct. Any listener would sense it targeted Kiss. The gradual demise of what the band once stood for. The guitar solo was breathtaking. 3 minutes of Ace channeling every frustration and fervor into his Les Paul. It recalled why Ace Frehley mattered, why his style shaped a generation of rock guitarists. Another, provisionally, Spacewalk, captured the cosmic essence ever tied to Ace's persona, but anchored in heavier, fiercer music. The central riff lodged in your brain instantly. The sort of hook that demands cranked volume and reckless speed. Lyrics toyed with space ace lore but twisted it, implying stellar voyages were escapes from earthly woes, from band intrigue to inner demons. Faster cuts, 2 straight-up rockers primed to slay live. Songs pulsing with the vigor and attitude Kiss had lacked since their mid-70s zenith. Had these surfaced whether as a Kiss record or Ace's next solo, they might have reawakened the world to true rock and roll. They could have rewritten the tale, proving Kiss still had bite, still commanded force. But the greatest mystery haunting these tapes for decades is this: Ace Frehley never finished the album. By late 1980, the sessions abruptly halted. The reels were boxed up, the project shelved, and for nearly 4 decades, almost no one knew they existed. The question tormenting Kiss historians since their discovery is simple: why? Why abandon material this potent? Why bury it over the years? Multiple theories emerged, each more compelling than the last. The most pragmatic explanation ties to contractual obligations. Kiss members were bound by recording deals, granting the band first refusal on anything they created. Had Ace revealed these songs, Gene and Paul could claim them for Kiss, potentially reshaping them beyond recognition or locking them away. By keeping it secret, Ace retained control. But control over unreleased work is still silence. Perhaps Ace realized release would spark legal battles. So, he protected the music by hiding it. A darker theory suggests someone did find out, maybe Eddie Kramer. The producer from Ace's solo album heard rough mixes and warned, "Release this now, and Kiss will destroy you legally and professionally." Wait. In 1980, Ace remained an official Kiss member, still tethered to internal politics. Dropping a solo album vastly superior to Kiss's current output could be seen as betrayal, a declaration of war. Perhaps he was advised to bide his time until fully separated from the band. But by the time that split came in 1982, Ace was mired in personal battles, and the momentum behind the 1980 recordings had evaporated. Ace has always been his own harshest critic. Maybe he listened back and found flaws others wouldn't notice. Vocals not quite right. Mixes needing work. He lacked resources to finish. Artists often abandon projects not because they're bad, but because they fall short of an internal vision. Ace might have decided these songs deserved better than he could give them then, so he preserved them, intending to return when conditions improved. Except conditions never improved. Life grew more tangled, not less. The bleakest possibility is that Ace's personal struggles simply overwhelmed everything. By late 1980, his drinking had intensified. His relationship with Kiss was poisonous. His marriage strained. The creative spark that fueled the sessions may have drowned in alcohol and despair. The tapes were boxed, not strategically, but as a symptom of someone losing grip on life. Music became secondary to survival. We may never know the true reason. Ace himself remains vague when asked about this era, his memories clouded by decades and the substance abuse that defined those years. But the tapes existed. They were real, and they lay dormant in boxes and storage units, moving from place to place as Ace's life turned its pages. John Regan knew what he was hunting, but wasn't sure he'd find it. Regan had played bass with Ace Frehley during the Frehley's Comet years in the late 80s. Over decades of friendship, Ace occasionally mentioned the lost songs from 1980, late-night stories, hazy recollections of sessions that produced something special. But the tapes, no one knew their whereabouts. Even Ace couldn't recall. Maybe discarded, maybe decayed. Analog tape doesn't last forever, especially if improperly stored. Regan was helping Ace sort through storage spaces, decades of gear and memorabilia scattered across locations. One unit in Queens held old amps, guitar cases, boxes of papers and photos. Nothing organized, just the chaos of a rock and roll life. In the back corner, beneath a road case and torn tarp, Regan spotted a cardboard box labeled CT Studio 1980 inches, faded marker. His heart raced. He pulled it out, opened it carefully. Inside were 12 reel-to-reel tapes, each labeled with song titles in Ace's handwriting: Fallen Angel, Spacewalk, Broken Heroes, Midnight Rebel. Names meaningless to anyone but Ace. The tapes looked intact. No obvious degradation. But the real question was whether they'd survived 4 decades in less than ideal conditions. Regan called Ace immediately. "I think I found them. The 1980 sessions. They're here." A long silence on the other end. Then Ace's voice, quiet and stunned. "You serious?" Within days, the tapes went to a professional audio restoration facility in New York. These specialists work with archival recordings, salvaging music from deteriorating formats. They loaded the first reel onto a vintage tape machine, calibrated meticulously, and hit play. What emerged from the speakers was astonishing. The recordings had survived nearly 4 decades in a cardboard box, and the sound endured still potent. Fidelity remarkable for basement sessions. You could hear every note of Ace's guitar, every nuance of his playing. The performances raw and energetic, preserving what studio polish often kills. Ace heard these recordings for the first time in almost 4 decades. According to those present, he was emotional. This was his younger self speaking across time, an Ace Frehley still fighting, still believing he could make music that mattered. The songs were better than he remembered. They deserved to be heard. While the full album has never been officially released, enough information has leaked from various sources to sketch what those 12 songs represented. Fallen Angel remains the centerpiece, the track everyone talks about. It's the epic, showcasing Ace's growth as songwriter and guitarist. The structure ambitious, shifting through sections, building tension, then releasing it. The lyrics tell of corruption and loss, yet ambiguous enough to apply to a person, a band, an entire scene. The guitar solo has been described by those who've heard it as one of Ace's finest recorded moments, a blues rock tour de force rivaling his best Kiss work. Spacewalk is the crowd pleaser, the track that could have been a radio single. It has that instant hook, the riff that makes you crank the volume and drive too fast. The song retains the cosmic theme always part of Ace's identity, but gives it a heavier edge. This isn't novelty space rock. It's serious, muscular, arena-ready. In a parallel universe, this song became a hit, and Kiss's 1981 tour was built around its energy. Broken Heroes is more introspective, a mid-tempo piece exploring the gap between image and reality. It's about the masks people wear literally and figuratively. Anyone familiar with Kiss history recognizes the metaphor, the makeup, the personas, the divide between stage selves and private selves. Ace, singing about Broken Heroes in 1980, was eerily prophetic. Within 2 years, he'd leave Kiss, and within 3, the entire band would remove their makeup. Admitting those personas couldn't be sustained, the remaining tracks vary in style and intensity. Some are straight-ahead rockers in the classic Kiss vein, sharp riffs, pounding drums. Others experiment with fresh sounds, showing Ace stretching beyond the formula. Notably, there's a gentle ballad driven mostly by acoustic guitar, revealing a rarely seen vulnerable side. Those who've heard it compare it to Beth, the surprise hit sung by Peter Criss in 1976. Had Ace's ballad been released, it might have entirely shifted public perception of him, no longer just the guitar hero, but a multifaceted artist. What threads through all 12 songs is authenticity. These are not calculated products chasing trends or pleasing executives. They are an artist making music true to himself, without compromise. That very authenticity is what Kiss lacked in 1980, and that's why these recordings remain so tantalizing. They represent a road not taken, a version of events where artistic integrity triumphed over commercial calculation. The biggest question, the one that elevates this story beyond mere curiosity: could these recordings have truly altered Kiss's trajectory? We can't know for sure, but let's explore the scenario. Suppose Ace had found a way to release them in late 1980 or early 1981, either as a Kiss album or his second solo project. The music industry was shifting. Raw, heavy sounds were returning. AC divided by DC proved no-frills rock still had massive appeal. Van Halen dominated with virtuosic guitar and explosive performances. The new wave of British heavy metal was rising, bringing aggression and authenticity back to the forefront. Kiss was perfectly positioned to ride this wave, except they were moving in the opposite direction. They were softening their sound, chasing pop radio. But if Ace's album had emerged raw, heavy, and real, it could have reminded everyone what Kiss was meant to be. It could have created internal pressure to return to their roots. Gene and Paul might have realized the audience wanted power, not polish. More crucially, it would have given Ace leverage. His 1978 solo album outsold the others, proving his commercial viability. If the 1980 recordings matched or exceeded that success, Ace would no longer be the sidelined member. He'd be the one whose vision was working, whose musical instincts were proven right. That could have shifted the internal power dynamic. Instead of being pushed out, Ace might have been pulled back in, granted more creative control. The elder, the disastrous 1981 concept album might never have happened. That record, with its pretentious progressive rock ambitions and total disconnect from what Kiss fans wanted, nearly ended the band's career. It sold poorly, toured poorly, and represented Kiss at their most lost and confused. Had Ace's raw, powerful music been the template instead, the band's path through the early 80s could have been entirely different. But we're dealing in hypotheticals. The recordings stayed hidden. Kiss continued down their troubled road. Ace's marginalization persisted until his departure in 1982, and the what if remains one of rock history's most compelling. After the 2019 discovery, speculation immediately arose about an official release. Ace was initially enthusiastic, publicly discussing cleaning up the tapes and sharing them with fans. There was talk of re-recording some tracks with modern production or releasing the originals as historical artifacts with enhanced sound. But years later, no official release has materialized. The reasons are layered. Legal issues over ownership are almost certainly involved. Kiss, as a corporate entity, still holds significant control over anything tied to the band's history. Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley may have contractual claims on material recorded while Ace was a member. Even if done independently, negotiating those rights is complex and costly. There's also the question of quality versus nostalgia. The tapes sound good for 1980 basement sessions. But do they meet modern standards? Would releasing them, as is, diminish their mystique? Ace is a perfectionist with his music. He may not want these raw sessions to represent his legacy unless they're properly finished, mixed, and mastered. But that work requires time, money, and energy resources that may not be available. Some tracks have apparently been reworked and folded into Ace Frehley's more recent albums. Melodies, riffs, lyrical ideas born in 1980, but finding final form decades later. In that sense, the lost album isn't entirely lost. It's been fragmented, its DNA scattered across Ace's later work. But the original vision, the 12 songs as they existed in 1980, remains unreleased. For Kiss fans and rock historians, that's frustrating. We have this tantalizing glimpse of what might have been, but we can't fully access it. It's like discovering a lost Shakespeare play, but only being allowed to read the stage directions. The complete experience remains just out of reach. Beyond the specific tale of these recordings lies a larger narrative about the music industry and the choices artists face. Kiss in the 70s and 80s embodied one of rock's fundamental tensions, the balance between artistic vision and commercial success. Gene Simmons openly embraced the commercial side, viewing Kiss as a brand and business. Paul Stanley balanced business instincts with genuine musical passion, but Ace and Peter Criss were always more purely artistic, more interested in the music than the merchandise. That philosophical divide tore the band apart. Gene and Paul wanted control because they believed they knew what would keep Kiss successful long-term. Ace and Peter wanted freedom because they believed authenticity mattered more than calculated success. Neither side was entirely wrong. Kiss became one of rock's most financially successful bands, validating Gene's business approach, but they also lost something essential along the way, the raw danger that made them special in the first place. The lost 1980 recordings represent Ace's side of that argument. They're what happens when a musician creates without compromise, without focus groups, without concern for radio formats or marketing strategies. They're pure artistic expression, and the fact they stayed hidden for decades is a tragedy, but also a statement. Sometimes art doesn't win. Sometimes the business side crushes the creative side. Sometimes brilliant work never reaches its audience because the industry's machinery can't accommodate it. Ace Frehley's career has been defined by this tension. His natural talent is undeniable. His influence on rock guitar is significant, but he's also been repeatedly frustrated by the industry's demands, by expectations that clashed with his vision, by compromises that felt like betrayals. The 1980 recordings are the ultimate symbol of that frustration. Music that could have mattered, that should have been heard, locked away because the timing wasn't right. Music history is full of lost recordings, abandoned projects, albums that almost happened. The Beatles aborted Get Back sessions before they became Let It Be. Prince's infamous vault, holding thousands of unreleased songs. Jimi Hendrix's unfinished work at the time of his death. These lost works fascinate us because they represent potential alternate timelines where music history went differently. Ace Frehley's 1980 album now sits in that category. It's a ghost, a shadow, a possibility. We know it exists. We know it was good, possibly great, but we can't fully experience it, and perhaps that mystery is part of its power. The album that could have saved Kiss becomes more legendary precisely because it didn't. The recordings hidden for 4 decades become more valuable because they represent a pure artistic moment, uncorrupted by commercial release and critique. For Ace himself, those tapes must carry layered emotions. They are proof of his talent and vision during a trying time. They show he was still producing meaningful work even as his relationship with Kiss crumbled, but they are also reminders of missed opportunities, battles lost, music that never reached its audience when it should have. The 2019 discovery gave Ace a chance to revisit these recordings and perhaps finally share them with the world. Whether that happens or not, the story itself holds value. It reminds us that great art isn't always commercially successful, that brilliant work sometimes stays hidden, and that the music we never hear can be just as vital as the music we do. The lost 1980 album is now part of Kiss mythology, part of Ace Frehley's legend. It represents everything the band could have been had they chosen a different path, if they had valued raw authenticity over calculated success. And sometimes, the power of what never was outweighs the reality of what happened. 12 songs locked in a cardboard box for 4 decades represent a moment of pure creativity, unbound by industry demands. They are a time capsule of an artist at a crossroads, crafting something beautiful the world wasn't ready to hear. Perhaps one day those recordings will be properly released, and we will finally experience Ace Frehley's lost masterpiece, or perhaps they will remain hidden a mystery. Unveiled, the album that could have saved Kiss but stayed locked away. Proof that sometimes the best music is the music we never heard. Yet the story doesn't end in regret. These tapes have sparked a broader conversation about the value of independent art in an age of commercialization. They remind us that artists like Ace, those who stand firm in their musical identity, often pay a steep price. But it is that very resolve that creates enduring work, whether it finds an immediate audience or not. In today's landscape, where streaming platforms and social media allow independent release easier than ever, Ace's 1980 tale remains relevant. It asks, are we losing pure creative moments to the pressure for instant success? Do today's artists have the courage to shelve their work until the right moment, or will they be swept into the vortex of views and likes? Moreover, the existence of these recordings is a tribute to the keepers of rock history. Regan, the audio restoration engineers, and Ace himself, they collectively preserved a piece of legacy that nearly vanished. The fact that the tape survived 4 decades in harsh conditions is a small miracle, but also proof of music's resilience. It can outlast time, outlast adversity, waiting only for the right person to find it. And when they were found, they didn't just tell the story of a lost album. They told the story of an artist who fought to keep his voice in a system that doesn't always honor it. Ultimately, whether this album ever sees full release, it has already fulfilled a crucial purpose. It reminds us that rock history isn't written only by chart-topping hits, but also by songs that never played, projects left unfinished, dreams buried. Ace Frehley in 1980 created something that transcended the constraints of his era. He captured a piece of Kiss's original soul, the very thing the band lost in their chase for fame. And because of that, even in hiding, those tapes continue to resonate, like a whisper from the past, reminding us of the power of true rock and roll.